everyone. I want to welcome everybody here to the NowSecure Zoom webinar series. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Brian Reed. I'm the Chief Mobility Officer here at NowSecure. And joining me today is Curtis from Synopsys, formerly CodeDX, who's been in the security orchestration and correlation space for a long time. Today, we'll be talking about powering faster DevSecOps pipelines with app security and orchestration and correlation. A couple of housekeeping tips for you. The chat is open, so you can chat with each other and anybody active on the Zoom today. We also have the Q&A tab. Please use the Q&A tab to ask questions. Curtis and I will answer those questions at the end of today's session. Today's session will be recorded, and we will share the recording and a link to the slides in a couple of days after the event. Today will include some polling. We would love to have you participate in the polling. And most importantly, today has big prizes giveaway at the end. So as Curtis and I are talking today, there will be some facts that you'll want to jot down so that at the end, when we ask the giveaway question, you're able to answer them. I'll give you your initial hit is both of our questions have numbers in them. So think about what we're going to talk about today, and that gives you the best chance to win at the end. Winner must be on the Zoom at the end in order to participate in the giveaway. And so with that, let me get us started. So I'd like to introduce Curtis. Curtis, would you like to say hello to the crowd here today and give us a little bit of your background?
Absolutely. So thanks, Brian. And thanks, everybody, for joining. My name is Curtis Bragdon, and I am now with Synopsys. And as of June, which I think is 4 or 5 months ago. This time really flies. Before that, I'd been at CodeDX for 4.5 years and helped it grow from a tiny little startup to a company with dozens of customers and was really expanding, and then got bought up. Prior to that, my career has been in services, customer-facing roles, as well as actually at one point being a software engineer. So I certainly have a lot of sympathy for people who are looking at security as part of development.
So thanks for joining us today. Again, I'm Brian Reed. I'm the Chief Mobility Officer. That means I talk a lot and work a lot with our clients on strategy here at NowSecure. I have been in mobile since BlackBerry, when secure mobility was an email device in your pocket. And I've been on a wild journey the last 15 or 20 years around mobile, AppSec, and mobile applications. So today we're going to talk about testing, correlation, orchestration, and all kinds of great things. So with that, let me advance the slide. There we go. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with NowSecure, maybe this is your first DevSecOps bunch. We are the leader and really the creator of the mobile application security testing category. Our company was founded in 2009, just after the birth of iOS and Android, as a mobile forensics company. We evolved into mobile pen testing and then commercialized software. Today, we work with kind of the who's who across lots of different industries, helping them build mobile app security into their pipeline, performing pen testing, and so on and so forth. So we're really big in standards. We're going to talk a little bit about OWASP-based testing today, whether it's OWASP, NIAP, IOXT, CVSS for assessing risk or what have you. And so we're excited to share some of that information. Also, our research team created the tools Frida and Radari. So if you're into reversing, you're probably familiar with Frida and Radari. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Curtis to introduce Synopsys.
Excellent. So Synopsys, you may have, for folks here, you may have actually be familiar with Synopsys several different ways. The biggest part of the company actually is in electronic design automation. So that's kind of any chip out there, almost every chip out there has been influenced by Synopsys and a couple of other companies in the industry as well. I'm part of something called the Software Integrity Group, which is one of the fastest growing parts of Synopsys. And that's with several different products that you might be familiar with. There's Coverity, Black Duck, Seeker, a number of others. If you've ever worked with people from a company called Cigital, that company is part of Synopsys as well. I'm not going to go through all the different locations, but it's very much a global company, both for the electronic design automation and for software integrity as well. And if you go to the next slide, Brian. And in terms of the overall reach of the company, whether you're in banking or you're an ISV or in aerospace and defense and so on and so forth, really just about every company or a majority of companies in every industry is a customer of one part of Synopsys or another for the both for EDA in semiconductors and then in the software integrity group across other industries as well.
All right. So with that, we're going to go into a little bit of polling now that you understand who we are and who our companies are. We'll have two polls here. If you're used to participating in the DevSecOps Bunch monthly webinar series, you know we're going to ask who you are and another question. So pop up the poll if you would, please, in the background. And with that, what we'd like to do is get your roles. So you can choose one of these roles: developer, DevOps, QA, security. The poll will be open for about 30 to 40 seconds. I know we have a lot of people here, so please do jump in. And of course, if you're not one of those, pick the other button. Our guesses will have some mix of security, DevOps, and other within this group. So it looks like about half the folks have voted. I'll leave it open for another couple of minutes. I think what's interesting today about security conversations is they're really development conversations in the end. And so I was on the phone earlier this morning with a Gartner analyst talking about the evolution of application security, which is really now a development problem and a development infrastructure and tooling world, not just a security world. And it's really great that we're now all raising the bar. So it looks like we have half the crowd is other, and we've got a lot of security people and a handful of dev and DevOps people. So we appreciate you answering that question. We will talk security to security folks. And for the others, well, we'll try to answer your questions. So second question is kind of, what do you have? So what kinds of tools do you already have deployed in your organization? SaaS, DAST, IS, SCA, cloud security, manual pen testing, other kinds of stuff. If you're a NowSecure or a Synopsys/CodeDX customer, we're going to bet that you have orchestration. So we didn't ask those very specific things, but we are interested in what makes up your security tool chain. So do we have the poll open there, Whitney?
Give me one moment. It's giving me some troubles.
Okay. So anyway, so welcome to technology. It's always fun. So why don't we just jump over the poll and we'll kind of get rolling into some content here. So, you know, when we think about what's happening now, the conversations I'm predominantly having as Chief Mobility Officer is with organizations really driving innovation, right? Here's a great example of, you know, technology enabling a family at home. Maybe it's from COVID. And you see the blended experience now that's both web, desktop, and mobile combined. And so what we all want to do is deliver these great, innovative, and safe experiences, right? If on the dev side, you're about innovation. If you're on security side, you're about safe. But something happens. The bigger and bigger and bigger that you get, the more pipelines you have, the more tools that you have, the more developers you have, the more security analysts you have, the higher the frequency of the releases, and on and on and on. It gets really complicated. And what we're discovering now for a lot of organizations is a lot of things are getting lost in the noise. And so the whole notion of DevOps and DevSecOps is to speed up the pipelines. What actually happens, the more tools and the more teams and the more pipelines you fire up, things can go kind of haywire in the overall complexity. And it can be difficult to find your way through the path. And so, you know, the experiences we've had at NowSecure and CodeDX and Synopsys are often helping organizations work their way through this complexity using automation and orchestration and a lot of intelligence to kind of reduce that complexity and really streamline and get back to that speed that everybody's looking for. So with that, Curtis, I think you've got some great data here from BSIM. I'll pass it back to you.
Absolutely. And this is from the most recent BSIM report. BSIM is actually something that the services team at Synopsys produces based upon many different companies across many different industries who share data. And kind of there's some interesting conclusions based upon the latest report. And really what this is about more than anything else is that companies really do want to continue the level of thoroughness in security that they have had. And in fact, they want to increase it more. They want software to be more secure and analyzed more thoroughly. But at the same time, there are a couple of things going on. One of those is that there are more and more different tools being used, which leads to kind of an overload of issues. But also, there are not just a whole lot of more tools and a whole lot more results, but at the same time, you have basically DevOps happening, right? Which is that in the kind of old style, back when I was actually writing software, it was really closer to, say, a waterfall model or maybe agile if you were lucky. Well, what those meant was that those were long cycle times and kind of very far out points on the calendar where releases and testing and so forth would take place, and security analysis could kind of fit neatly, kind of in a far off place, something that happened infrequently. What's happened now, and tools and processes were really designed with that in mind. But what's happening is that companies really are embracing DevOps, which inherently is a good thing. But the issue with that is that there's kind of a mismatch, if you will, between what's going on in the development world and what's going on in the AppSec world. And what that means is that, and that mismatch is only getting wider and wider, right? Because you have companies that want to release more and more frequently, and more companies want to release on a more frequent basis because for a number of reasons, which is outside the scope of this discussion, that just makes sense, right? And in fact, it provides more secure and more reliable software, more functionality faster, and so forth. But what that means is that the testing itself has gotten finer and finer grained, which means that kind of the old style doesn't really work as well, which means that there's a need for both new tooling and new processes. And go ahead, go to the next slide, Brian. So something else to consider is this is actually a separate poll or a separate study that Synopsys commissioned earlier this year. And one of many different questions across a number of different organizations, actually many organizations across several different industries, was how many different security testing or how many different application security testing tools are in use? And that could be anything from everything has to be scanned with some software composition analysis tool, or there's static analysis or dynamic analysis or bug bounty or pen testing, et cetera, et cetera. And if you take a look at across all the different tools, it's actually kind of striking. If you take a look at these numbers, what you can see is that the vast majority of companies have more than 11 or more tools. That's pretty significant because if you've got one tool or two tools, well, managing those results and managing when things get kicked off and coming up with some analysis to say how secure or unsecured software is across the company, that's not so hard. You get it up to more than 11, well, that's really quite significant. And that's where the vast majority of companies lie. And that's actually along with the fact that companies want to have more and more frequent releases and more frequent testing to match the frequent releases. What that means is there's a big challenge for security teams working alongside the DevOps teams. Back to you, Brian.
And so with the tooling complexity, right, let's take a look at what's actually going on just from an AppSec perspective. So when we drill down into mobile, while the majority of digital traffic and time, some 69% is spent in mobile and web, the stats are pretty rough. We benchmark the app stores, Apple and Google Play stores every year. And every year we basically get the same data that about 85% of the App Store apps have one or more security flaws that violate the OWASP Mobile Top 10. And about 70% of them leak CCPA or GDPR. And so whether you're on the security side or the privacy side, certainly the consumer side, the personal data at 70% is a big deal. And then when we look at automation and orchestration and all the rest, we find that very few organizations can actually automate their security testing. Some 9% report the ability to automate. And if you're a follower of the software supply chain, the attacks clearly are increasing. You know, SolarWinds is just tip of the iceberg. There's a benchmark report out that shows 650% explosion in software supply chain attacks in the last year. So the reality is we're all working harder, but sometimes it feels like we're paddling upstream or trying to push the snowball upstream. And so what we want to do today is share some best practices on what we can do to kind of deal with the upstream, downstream situation. So if we take a look at like a typical software lifecycle, they look like this, and you and your organization will probably have some picture like this. So, there's some sort of skilling, training type of activity that might go on for your teams. Then there's the requirements and design. You start writing some code, you commit the code, you do a build, you run a test, rinse and repeat, cycle. Eventually, you're ready to release, move into staging, and then into deployment. So whatever your picture is within your organization, it'll be something like this. And when we start thinking about, what security in the lifecycle exists, there really is a village. It could take a village to deliver secure apps, whether they're mobile or web or otherwise. So everything from SCA repo scans to static to dynamic to API in the back end. And what about CSA? And how do we deal with manual pen testing? What pieces can we automate? And oh, by the way, what are we going to do about testing and monitoring in production, right? All these different things really comprise what could be your security program. And for many of you, I think per that last set of stats, with the average of, 11 or more tools, you've got lots of these, right? So how do you make them all work well? How do you make sure that the pipeline is actually moving at the speed you want it to run? And what a lot of clients come back with that we hear, and I know Synopsys hears as well, is this notion of too much noise in the machine coming off of the tools. But to go with that, even with all that noise, there's still not enough security testing going on, especially in an automated fashion. There's not enough development skills going on with deep security, especially in the mobile space. And there's still a lot of this last minute manual testing, fire drill kind of stuff. And all of that impedes the ability for the pipeline to move fast. It slows down the business. It frustrates and creates friction. Some of you may be in a world, I know that we do a lot of marriage counseling between dev and sec, trying to bring them together. And all of those things we want to try to smooth out. And so there's really two parts to this. There's automation and there's orchestration. So I'm going to do the automation piece, and then Curtis is going to do the orchestration piece. So when we think about, the traditional way of testing, this goes back to when I ran QA in 1991. You write a chunk of code every day. You do that for a lot of days. Let's say my team's writing 1,000 lines of code a day, and I do that for eight weeks. Then I've got a whole ton of code to test at the end. Then I got to go fix it. Then I got to retest. Then I got to fix it again. So maybe an 8-week development cycle becomes a 12-week release cycle. If you're like me, you lived through the journey where a whole lot of defects escaped and a lot of things that you tried to push down to P3 or P4 so you could release with them and put them in the backlog and yada, yada, yada. It's just not efficient. And even when I was on the QA side and then got into the AppSec testing side, I never really understood why we waited to the end, and always look for ways to improve performance, throughout. And so, I was part of building one of the first automated test suites back in the early 90s. And it's really all about a strategy of testing every build every day. So as you check in code every day, you ought to test it. You should be continuously scanning your repos, right? And so on and so forth. And if you do that incrementally every day, then that means the next morning your developers wake up with new tickets for stuff to fix. Not only does it compress the cycle, it also reduces the amount of escape defects because your code coverage is much deeper and richer because you're testing everything all the time. And so it really works. I mean, the economics are there, the finances are there, there's statistics, lots of industry benchmarks that show it. You really do cut off time and improve quality by doing this. And so when we think about extending the pipeline and how do we take that academic exercise and turn it into reality, there's no silver bullet. What we have found with most of our clients is there's a handful of things you can do to make it work. And some of it's just really straightforward. Like, how do you organize and establish policies between dev and sec, and of course, QA and ops? So establishing security policies that say, these are the things we care about, these are the things we don't. From a QA perspective, this is what we're going to test. From a security perspective, this is our criteria for P1, P2, P3. From a development perspective, here's our SLA. We will immediately work on P1s, we'll investigate P2s, P3s, and 4s, go into backlog, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So setting mutually agreed policies from any organization immediately accelerates the speed in the pipeline and reduces the friction and frustration. There's lots of industry standards you can use. OWASP has a great set with the OWASP mobile project, along with the web project, the API projects, and all the rest. Take advantage of those and use that as a way to bring dev and QA and sec together to establish what does matter, what is your testing criteria, and how you're going to run it. The reality also is that you probably have different kinds of apps with different threat models and different risk levels, and so you can create different flows and policies based on the threat level and the risk level of your applications. So now once you get it going, then you need to orchestrate across this community. And we're going to hear more about that from Curtis here in a little bit. So the next thing to do is to really move from a manual driven security testing model into a continuous testing model. And it's really exciting today that there are automated security testing tools that can plug into your DevOps pipeline, whether they're SaaS tools scanning your repos or they're binary testing tools like NowSecure that are testing the builds every day. Make sure you're not just relying on SaaS, because SaaS inherently has not only a hot false positive rate, more importantly, when you're looking at mobile, you miss a lot. Generally, what we have found in those millions of apps benchmarks is that static testing only finds about 20% of the actual vulnerabilities. DAST and IAST are needed to really find the bulk of the vulnerabilities that exist in mobile applications. That's why people have relied on pen testing, because a lot of pen testing is a dynamic and interactive oriented approach. Now, you can today, with modern technologies like NowSecure, actually test on a live running device in a fully automated mode with no human interacting with it, which is pretty cool. You can turn on or your choice of MASVS or MSTG tech lists and so on and so forth. When you're doing the testing, the other thing to remember is thinking about the release cycle. In the web world, you can probably release whenever you want, subject to your corporate requirements, because you own the website. But when you're talking about mobile, you have to take into consideration, what are Apple and Google going to block? So for example, Google just put up a rule that said if your Google Android SDK is prior to version 29, they will reject you from the Google Play Store. So that's not a security vulnerability necessarily. That's a Google requirement that says your app has to be SDK version 29 or later. So we find things like that are just as important and just as likely to slow you down as security issues. Now, as part of that testing, then you want the automated testing to automatically generate tickets that are fed back to your development team. And it's great that tools like this can do that. And so if the goal is faster feedback loops, the goal is actually also faster fix cycles. So the faster feedback loop comes because I'm continuously testing every day all the new code and continuously providing that feedback. But what matters also is the mean time to resolution and your dwell time. So when you feed those tickets in, make sure you get enough rich data so the developer can identify and fix those issues, right? So you need description, you need severity so that they can understand priority, and that aligns with your P1, P2, P3 SLA. You need evidence, like where did these issues occur? What are remediation instructions? What are links to Apple and Google documentation? Do you have videos to show me how to understand this technology, and so on and so forth? And so make sure you have rich tickets, because that's really what will speed resolution. And as you go through this, what actually happens is you get this virtuous cycle that with the embedded remediation, you're actually teaching as they're fixing. And that means you're going to reduce your overall vulnerability or security bug stack and backlog, because your team's getting smarter as they go. And they fix it faster because the answer is sitting in front of them. They don't have to go to the internet and use the Google search engine to try to figure out how to fix a particular vulnerability. Now, when you get into prod, we still need to monitor prod, right? Why do we monitor prod? Well, you need to monitor for supply chain issues. Maybe one of the components that your third-party components you're using is changed underneath you, or maybe one of the API endpoints that your app's talking to is changed underneath you. But it could also be that there are issues in other companion applications or technology that create issues as well. So most of our best-in-class customers actually use us to monitor their apps in production to make sure none of the dependencies or any other infrastructure has changed, or no one's tried to tamper with their application in the app stores as well. So you take all that, you tie it all together with the pre-prod and the prod data. Now you have a continuous improvement mechanism that you can use that gives you kind of end-to-end visibility, and you can track and tune and work to optimize your flows. So I want to remind folks that we're going to be taking Q&A at the end, so please do use the Q&A. And with that, I'm going to say, what happens when? So I'm working in this ideal world. I got a fast-moving pipeline. Maybe I've only got a couple of developers and a couple of apps. Well, that's easy. But when you have many pipelines, we have customers with hundreds of mobile apps, which means hundreds and thousands of pipelines. And you've got all these tools and all these people and all these issues and all these tickets and all these releases and all these stage gates and really you need to move into a whole different world around orchestration, correlation, and all the rest. And so with that, I want to hand it back over to my friend Curtis to talk to us about continuous orchestration.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks, Brian. Yeah, so let's just transition over from what Brian was talking about, which is the overall path that a development team is going to be taking, but then also think about a couple of things that I was talking about earlier, which is that you've got a very specific set of steps that you have to follow, and you've got to follow them fairly quickly. But at the same time, remember that there are all these different tools, right? So if you think back to the earlier slide, the majority of companies out there, 11 or more different analyzers for security that are being used possibly at any given time. How do we make that efficient, right? How do you have all those different things running inside of this cycle? And Brian, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so let's talk about two different things here, right? One of them is that there are just tons and tons of issues. How do you deal with that, right? So Brian did mention, you've got a lot of different things out there. You might have SaaS, you might have DAS, or IAST, or SCA, you might have NowSecure, you might have pen testing, bug bounty, and all these different things going on. Well, that's really what CodeDX, what the team really came up with. The idea was, you know what, there are all these companies that have all these different analyzers. What can you do in order to bring things into one place? And one of the things that we noticed early on, in fact, this is 4 or 5 years ago, in fact, continued to notice, and what's really interesting is that we continue to notice it to this day, talking with organizations large and small, is that we see things where there are spreadsheets, which is my own personal favorite, which is to be able to say, well, we've got our static analyzer and our dynamic analyzer, and we've got things coming in from pen testing, and there are PDFs and there are emails and there are reports from the field and a phone call and all these different things. Well, let's just get them into a spreadsheet, right? And then we can start emailing the spreadsheet around. And if we want to get really fancy, we're going to throw it up on SharePoint or Google Docs or something like that. Well, that's fantastic, except that it's not, right? Because it's really a brittle solution and it's very much a non-scalable solution. Because the other thing that's going on is that you have software engineers who, number one, don't want to have a whole lot of things sent to them, right? So it's good you've brought them all into one place. That takes care of that part. But you've got to be able to get the number of issues down. And the second part is, again, I'm very sympathetic to this, having been a software engineer, is that it's really no fun to go off to lots of other different places to look, to see, all right, what are my static issues? What are my dynamic issues, and so forth. So not only get those down, but also put them in something that's familiar, right? So that's Jira, or that's ServiceNow, or Azure DevOps, and there are a bunch of others out there as well. And then from the developer perspective, only have to go to that one place, right? If you take a look at productivity, and one of my favorite terms is developer friction, right? Which is, all right, I'm in my IDE and then I'm going to go off to Jira. Well, that's not so bad, but I'm in my IDE and I've got to go off to Jira, but now I've got to go off to this other website, or now I've got to go off to this other website and then compare that with something else. Every single one of those is a bit of friction, right? And every bit of friction is lost productivity from the developer standpoint, and every bit of lost productivity, or every bit of friction from the developer standpoint, is a reason not to go off and deal with the security issues that are being reported. So if you can get everything all into one place, and also be able to have that place be something that's not so brittle, like, say, a custom data lake or a spreadsheet or what have you, then you have one single place to go, right? Just one system of record. But at the same time, be able to use that in order to cut things down. So you've heard this term correlation, and essentially what correlation is, just a very, very fancy matching, right? So if you've got two different analyzers coming up with the same thing, just deal with that once, right? That's the kind of thing that can be automated, is to be able to match that up. And then also make sure to push those off to something like Jira, so that it's not another place to go, right? A defect tracking system already has performance issues and bugs and reports from the field and all kinds of other things. Well, security is just kind of a variation on that, or at least it should be thought of as that way, right? It's a special one, but it's really just a variation on, here are things to fix in the software, here are improvements to make, which from the developer standpoint, those really all belong in one place. So that's the CodeDX view of the world. And Brian, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So the other part of it, this is something called intelligent orchestration. Actually, the genesis of this is really quite interesting. It was actually part of some services that Synopsys was offering. This is even prior to the CodeDX acquisition, but you'll see how the two of these fit together. And essentially what people noticed was that as DevOps was getting faster and faster, right? As release cycles are getting tighter and tighter, as deadlines are just kind of merging into other deadlines, but at the same time, the chunks of software that are released or the chunks of software that are worked on are also getting smaller and smaller. The idea of taking some big, massive, monstrous tool like a static analyzer or dynamic analyzer and so forth, that became less and less appealing. That was a problem because what that meant was that you could have really essentially pipeline congestion. And it's really what that means is, well, you've got the pipeline moving along, and think back to the diagram that Brian had. And in that pipeline, you've got a whole series of steps. Well, what if one of those steps is taking hours and goes across the entire software, or goes across all the software base, but it's only in response to changing a few lines of code in a font file? That doesn't seem like the kind of thing that really warrants a full scan. And that's what intelligent orchestration was a response to. It said, all right, you don't always need this, but you sometimes need that, right? Well, how do you express this policy? It's expressed as code. When I say code, it literally is code. And that's really an improvement, and not just because I like code, and I think everybody here likes code, but it's also an improvement because policy for how often you run static analyzers or dynamic or SCA, or how often you have certain tasks take place. Right now, that's policy as PDF, or policy as essentially corporate folklore, right? For policy as email, or policy that's somewhere on some internal website that nobody can seem to remember how to get to. Instead, what you do is to say, this is something that should be automated. So there are really two things going on. And Brian, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. There are really two different things going on, right? Both of which are after the same thing. And that same thing is, how do we make this faster, right? Still have to have security, still have to have more security. In fact, just go ahead, look at your favorite website about hacks, breaches, and so forth, and you'll see that the security problem has not been solved, nor will it ever be solved. All you can hope to do is to improve on it. But that means more security analysis, or I should really say better targeted security analysis. That's the intelligent orchestration part of it. At the same time, it's saying, well, you know what? There are lots of different things getting run here. Some are mobile specific, some are website specific, some may be specific to legacy applications and so forth. What that means is you still have to have that one central place, be able to cut down on the total number of issues, and then be able to put those in a place that is familiar and is comfortable for those who can actually do something to deal with it, the software development teams. And Brian, we can go ahead and go to the next slide here. And so again, think about this in the context of what Brian started talking about there. And again, imagine that you're one of the half or more companies that have 11 or more different security analysis tools, static, dynamic, etc. What this is about is saying, yes, early on, you have to say, here's what the standards are. But later on in the kind of the heat of the development cycle, or as you go from one release to the next, or from one sprint to the next, what that means is that you have to have fewer results, even though there's more security taking place. It's almost a little paradox, but the reason why it makes sense is because the right tools are getting run on as frequent basis as they need to. Everything's in one place, and duplicates are eliminated, and issues are being sent off to developers one place and something that's familiar. And back to you, Brian.
Awesome. So when we think about kind of bringing it all together here, right? When we look at, the 11 or more tools that organizations are using, when we look at the fact that, 70% of mobile apps have privacy issues, I'm sure the website data is pretty challenging as well. What we're really talking about here is bringing together this notion of automation with continuous testing and orchestration with continuous routing effectively. And what that really does is these two things combine to really build the speed that most organizations need. And so as you're looking to evolve your pipeline, evolve your tool chain, and really evolve performance of your teams, bring together security, QA, DevOps, and development, and look at combining automated continuous security testing along with automated orchestration. And what that will allow your organization to benefit from is an automated infrastructure that does more than half of the work for them. And that squeezes out the inefficiencies, and then your teams can focus on the things that are important to them, so they don't have the issues. So when we look at some key takeaways, in the DevSecOps bunch, it's always tradition to give you a couple of handful things. So I'll do a few and then I'll hand it to Curtis. So, from an automation perspective, make sure everybody's got tools for automation related to AppSec, or more specifically in my world, mobile AppSec. And that's part of the reason why organizations have more than 11 tools. Deploy the autonomous testing in the pipeline. That continuous security testing really watches your back. It's just like a real-time cardiac monitor monitoring your health. I've got all these wearables on my body right now because I'm a gadget freak, right? Do the same for your pipelines. Make sure you're testing incrementally. Practice incrementalism of testing, coding, reviewing every day rather than waiting for the big bang effect. And then make sure everybody's trained and working off the same policy. Each of those things combined, if each one improves your performance and reduces your risk by 10%, you get a 50% improvement because there's 5 of them, right? And that's really the key takeaways we wanted to share today from the automation perspective. Over to you, Curtis, on the orchestration perspective.
Absolutely. So again, to reiterate why this is so significant is the number of tests are getting greater and greater, right? Because the number of releases for code are getting greater and greater. But at the same time, the amount of testing, or the actual size of the test, the size of the code released at any given time, is actually getting smaller and smaller. So number one, you have to take advantage of that, right? Yes, this has to be more frequent, but also it has to be more targeted. It has to be targeted in a smart way, and has to be targeted in a way that is automatable rather than specified in some PDF someplace. And at the same time, it also is very important, again, given the number of different analyzers that are in place, that as security increases, the number of issues should go down, right? And those need to come down not just because of targeted testing, but they also need to come down by having things in a single place and having all the duplicates not having to be dealt with. And because of having things in one place, also being able to take advantage of other methods as well in order to cut down on the total amount of work for the development team. And back to you, Brian.
All righty. So with that, we both have some resources on the Synopsys website. There's a link here. There is a ton of content. I actually learned a lot more about CodeDX preparing for the webinar. So we encourage you to take advantage of the free content here from Synopsys. And tons of free resources from NowSecure. I'm going to hit you with a couple of them. For those, you're here because you want to learn. So we got 2 great training resources for you. NowSecure Academy is a free AppSec training platform. So you can go to academy.nowsecure.com right after this call, log in yourself, create your own account, and start learning. So it's a free AppSec learning for dev and sec and architects and QA. On the right-hand side, there's NowSecure Connect. I'll talk about that in a minute. And we have a bunch of other things tracking what's going on in the app stores and in dev pipelines and breaches and all that other fun stuff. Some white papers, an ebook, and all the rest. We also just fired up an SBOM offering. So we've got early access to our SBOM offering. So if you're interested in looking at SBOMs, give us a shout. You can sign up for free 10 SBOM oriented subscription as well. So NowSecure Connect is coming up in a little over a month. NowSecure Connect every year has become the sort of the mobile AppSec event for dev, for sec, for management, for risk teams, for compliance teams, all things mobile and mobile AppSec. So we encourage you to sign up for it. It is free and anyone can attend. Many on-demand courses are in that, along with some really phenomenal keynotes. Some of our DevSecOps bunch speakers are joining us on that. They're doing updates to their content from earlier in the year. We have some pretty amazing external speakers as well. John Mutter from IBM, Emily Freeman from AWS. She wrote the DevOps for Dummies books, and the list goes on and on. So we encourage you to have a look at Connect and join us in that journey. And so it's giveaway time. So the way giveaway time works is using the chat box. The audience, need to answer one question at a time. I'm going to ask you a question on behalf of Synopsys, and then we'll wait for 3 people to give us the right answer. And those 3 people will win a gift box or prize from Synopsys. And then I'll ask a question related to mobile, AppSec, and NowSecure. And the first 3 people that answer that correctly will win as well. And so the first question, so again, get your keyboard ready, make sure your chat box is open and up and ready. So the first 3 people get it right, and I'm going to open mine so I can actually see who answers. First question is, what is the average number of security tools organizations have? We said it a whole bunch today. What is the average number of security tools that organizations have? Looking for the first 3 people to answer the question correctly. Keep going. Anybody else? Oh, I love the 50 to 60. So it looks like we have David, Yuri, and Jeremy as our winners. David, Yuri, and Jeremy. It is 11 or more. Thank you for picking that. I would love to see your toolchain picture, Ashok, who has 50 to 60. There actually are some that are that big. I know we've both seen it. All right, so thank you for that, Whitney. I assume you caught those names. And I'm going to move into the second question, which is, when looking at the App Store, what percentage of mobile apps in the App Store have privacy issues that would fail GDPR and CCPA? I said that number a few times today. What percentage of mobile apps in the public app stores have privacy issues that could fail GDPR and CCPA? I think we already got a couple winners, but you know what? They might win twice. So it looks like we have Yuri and David with a 70% number. So that is correct. Gaurav, scarily, when I run the report next, maybe there will be 80%, but we got 2 folks to win here as well. All right. We'd like to thank you for participating in our little bit of fun. And now we're going to move into Q&A. So let me pop open the Q&A poll and give me just 1 second to get in there. And I will have a look at our questions today. Where is it? There it is. Come on. It's hidden under another screen, so I got to flip my way through everything to get all the way over there. All righty, let's see. Looks like first question is, this is for you, Curtis, who on the development or security team would use CodeDX? Who would use your tool, CodeDX?
Yeah, great question. So a lot of people, both directly and indirectly. So for direct users, those tend to actually be the AppSec folks. Those are either people who are not involved in day-to-day development, or they might also be kind of an embedded expert, or a person, not embedded systems, but a person who is an expert in AppSec who's embedded in the development team, or might be, say, a technical lead or security champion. People like that would tend to use CodeDX directly. We also see management typically from, say, a reporting or dashboarding use of it. But really, all the development team ends up using CodeDX very often without knowing it. And honestly, I think that's great. The reason for that is that if you've got somebody who is benefiting from having just one place and everything funneling into one place and having the issues cut down, that's going to be the developer. And that's going to make that person much happier. So great question. Thank you.
Good question. All right. So the next question is, do you integrate with Microsoft Azure DevOps? So yes, we do. We actually integrate with dozens of DevOps tools, including CodeDX and other Synopsys tools as well. So we believe in integration, the tool chain. We're actually an API first company. So if there isn't a pre-configured integration, then you can use our APIs. We also have a GraphQL endpoint if you're big into querying data that way. So the answer is yes on that one. Let's open the Q&A tab again. Remind you can use that yourself. Actually, question for you, Curtis. I think my answer just inspired it. So what other kinds of tools does CodeDX integrate with besides these?
Yep, there you go. Okay, so there's both the the question, Brian, that you answered, which is around Azure DevOps. So for CodeDX, there's tools that are for issue tracking. So Jira, Azure DevOps, ServiceNow, that kind of thing. But also tools that actually really control and manage the build, right? So ALM systems and things like Jenkins and a couple of other tools that are of that nature. Source code control systems, those are sometimes part of an integration with CodeDX, although those tend to be a little bit further back on the overall flow. And then if you talk about things that are downstream, then really there are a lot of different things that we see. Reporting systems is one. One of the things that we actually get asked about a lot, this is very interesting, is GRC systems, which folks are not familiar. That's governance, risk and compliance tools, and those are there are a number of different ones out there that are well known. But essentially, what those are about, those are things that tend to get used by people in finance and the board and executives and so forth. And those are all about coming up with a measurement of risk or discovering where risk is across the entire organization. And what's significant about that is that AppSec is really seen as not just, well, here, this is really interesting and technical and nerdy and all those things, and we love them, but it's really about something that affects corporate risk as well, right? So this is something that from a legal or financial standpoint, well, as soon as somebody like that gets involved, you know it's serious. So that's the kind of thing that we see. And I'll make a note. So Brian, you mentioned that NowSecure is API first, and so is CodeDX.
There you go. All right. We definitely live in an API economy one way or the other. So there's two more questions in here for us to finish out. So I'll pass the one to you, which is our CodeDX and IO package with other Synopsys tools. Maybe that's a Synopsys customer or wannabe there.
Yeah, there you go. So the answer is they can be they'll work very well together, and they will work very well with Synopsys tools, but they are architected and designed and actually originally developed to be deployed and used separately. So with CodeDX, we have customers some of whom have Synopsys tools, some of whom have tools from competitors, some of whom have tools or not just tools, processes as well. Sometimes there are tools that are in the public domain, open source analyzers out there, so things like Zap and spot bugs and things like that. So CodeDX is designed, and in fact IO is also designed to work with tools that could be part of Synopsys, could be part of something else as well. So all these things, while they're designed to work nicely together, they're designed so they can be deployed separately as well.
All righty. And our last question here is for me, which is what mobile languages and frameworks do you support? So we support any language or framework. The cool thing about the fact that we test mobile app binaries is it doesn't matter what the binary was built in. As long as the mobile app can run on a standard iOS or Android device, meaning can it run on an iPhone, an iPad, or can it run on a Pixel, an Android Pixel device, which is typically what we're using in our test labs, then we can test it. So that means you don't have to worry about, well, does this app support, Kotlin or Swift or what have you? The answer is yes. No matter what you coded it in, as long as it compiles down into a binary that runs on those platforms, then we can test it, which is really cool. So with that, we are out of questions. I would very much like to thank Curtis and the Synopsys/CodeDX team for joining us, and we look forward to continued great things in the market together. From the NowSecure side, I'd like to thank you for participating. There's really great information, I think, that we shared today. As I said earlier, we did record this program, so you get a copy of the recording and the PDF of the slides here in a couple of days. Please take advantage of all the resources that we share. There's tons of free stuff in there. Sign up for NowSecure Connect if you want to learn more about AppSec and app dev with security in place. Lots of great topics and sessions available there, plus some on-demand learning as well. And take advantage of NowSecure Academy and the Synopsys resources as well. So we wish everybody a good day. As I said earlier, we are going to skip November because we're having NowSecure Connect, and we'll see you back in December with another fantastic speaker with the NowSecure DevSecOps Bunch webinar series. Have a good day, everyone. Goodbye now.